Hey everyone, Anark here. With the election of Donald Trump last month, the conversation around fascism has begun again. The Democrats, in the lead-up to the election, even accused Trump of being America's Hitler. At the time of recording, Trump has not yet become president. However, we have 3 major election campaigns and 1 term in office in order to judge him by. We can also see the prevailing opinions of the MAGA movement. So today we're going to use the diagnostic criteria for fascism and see if Trump and the MAGA movement qualify as fascist. And I should note, no, I don't mean fascist as in everything I don't like is fascist. We're going to use the work of the 3 leading theorists of fascism, Umberto Eco, Robert Paxton, and Roger Griffin. Let us start by briefly discussing Roger Griffin's conception of Palingenetic ultranationalism, as it's a useful overview of what we're going to talk about for the rest of the video. So let's start with that palingenetic part. That refers to the desire to return to a mythic past, to reclaim some lost national vigor. The rebirth of this previous state of existence drives everything about fascism. This mythological retelling motivates the fascist movement to cathartic violence in destroying its enemies both domestically and abroad. The second component is ultranationalism. Ultranationalism is not just nationalism, but extreme nationalism. It's predicated on seeking the benefit of the nation at all costs. It's not just the statement that one prefers one's nation, or that they will prioritize their nation over others, but that one's nation should reign supreme over others, that it has some inherent trait that makes it the best and all others should be subservient. Keep these features in mind as we proceed, as they will repeat themselves again and again in the features of fascism we are about to discuss. Before we start, I understand that maybe you're doubtful. In your mind, fascism means genocide and concentration camps and imperialist wars of aggression. But, as Umberto Eco says, it would be so much easier for us if there appeared on the world scene somebody saying, I want to reopen Auschwitz. I want the black shirts to parade again in the Italian squares. Life is not that simple. Fascism can come back under the most innocent of disguises. Our duty is to uncover it and to point our finger at any of its new instances, every day in every part of the world. And maybe you're inclined to doubt him. Who's Umberto Eco, right? Here's the thing. Umberto Eco actually lived in fascist Italy as a young person, and he was a fascist during this period of time. He only escaped fascism and deconverted from its ideals after the fall of Mussolini. This makes him one of our best witnesses of the phenomena. He's not studying it from afar, he lived it. Eco says that there are 14 features of fascism that appear in all examples. He calls this fascism or eternal fascism. I should also note, before we get started, that fascism is not just when one of these features occurs, nor is there a threshold where if a certain number of them occur, it becomes fascism. However, neither do all of them need to occur for it to be fascism. Fascism can congeal around any of these by themselves and begin to take on more and more of the entries on the list gradually. But rest assured, as more and more of the features on the list are checked, that movement is becoming more fascist. And if you qualify under all 14 of Eco's features, that is fascism. So let's go through all 14 of these points and let's see how the MAGA movement measures up. The first trait on the list is the cult of tradition. And I don't think I really have to stretch too hard to show how the MAGA movement and conservatives more broadly qualify under this first feature. After all, MAGA literally means make America great again. Again. That is to say, there is some idyllic past it wants to return to. It's open to interpretation when that time is, but every conservative essentially agrees that sometime in the past was better. Some think it was the 80s and 90s, some think it was the 50s, some even think it was before capitalism, such as in the case of people who have crusader avatars and have Deus Vult in their descriptions. Ultimately, the entire conservative right wing is based in a desire to reclaim some lost national vigor, which it sees as declining since whenever that period of time that it considers the idyllic past was. Right-wingers also constantly hearken to imagery of the early American colonists. There is extensive use of the Confederate flag. The use of the Confederate flag is a desire to reclaim an explicitly white supremacist past. It's also closely associated with the KKK, which itself was formed to reestablish racial separatism and slavery in the U.S. The right wing is also extremely religious. They support evangelical and biblical literalist perspectives of the Bible, and in a general sense, they want Christianity to be the national religion. The second feature on the list is rejection of modernism. Here I'll offer a caveat. Our conservatives are usually not in rejection of modernism, but postmodernism. And this is because Eco was writing at a time when modernism, or Enlightenment philosophy, was the basis of that society. That was the liberal ideal that they were fighting back against. So instead, fascists at that time just wanted to return to those pre-modern traditions, and that usually involved some sort of valorization of monarchy. However, because fascism is always seeking to return to the past, our fascists are not rejecting modernism, they are rejecting postmodernism. So that includes the philosophical, but also the artistic movements. You can see how much they hate abstract art. It's all over their media. Jordan Peterson, for example, is constantly harping about postmodernism.
You need to understand postmodernism because that's what you're up against. And you're up against it far more than you know or think. And it's a much more well-developed and pervasive, pernicious, nihilistic, intellectually attractive doctrine than has yet come to public realization. It absolutely dominates the humanities and increasingly the social sciences in the universities.
We see James Lindsay constantly talking about how much he hates postmodernism.
They're going to administer an economy to make shares equal. The only difference between equity and socialism is the type of property that they redistribute, the type of shares. They're going to redistribute social and cultural capital in addition to economic and material capital.
To do this, they pretend to embrace modernism. They're the classical liberals, right? This is where we get Shapiro talking about facts and logic, even though there are constantly these veiled references to pre-modern philosophers, such as the Greeks and the Christian medievalists, for example, in the case of Michael Knowles and Jordan Peterson again.
Unlike even St. Augustine's view of government, which is, don't make me sin. Just curb some of the bad stuff. St. Thomas Aquinas recognizes that the government is there actually to encourage virtue.
So in this sense, there is a rejection of both postmodernism and modernism to some degree. Many in the movement, however, openly glorify the Crusades and use imagery of crusading knights and put Deus Vult in their bios. This is a desire to return to monarchy, just like those classically fascist movements. Or, for example, I found this conservative round table that was done by the Daily Wire, where they got a bunch of conservative thinkers together, and when they sat down, they had to admit that the right wing was beginning to seriously entertain these ideas of monarchy and a return to feudalism and dictators.
There's a new sort of, I shouldn't say new, it's been sort of fermenting for the last handful of years, but I think it's really gaining prominence now, both in the very intellectual part of the American right, but also in the very fringe parts of the American right, are also circling the same idea. That makes the idea, I think, something that we should talk about, and that's this idea that the American experiment is over. This idea that none of our institutions that have taken us through the last 2+ centuries on this continent exist anymore, that we can't find any solution to our cultural and political problems through the political system, and that perhaps it's time to look to older systems, strongman, monarchy, even dictator. I mean, when you have major voices in the sort of conservative intelligentsia openly discussing the idea of whether a dictator will be required to save this country, or an emperor would be required to save this country, or a king would be required to save this country, I think that that's something that merits actual conversation.
The third feature in the list is action for action's sake. So some examples of this are like the Proud Boys initiation rituals.
I am a Western chauvinist. And I refuse to apologize. For creating the modern world. Gentlemen, 3, 2, 1.
Great nuts! 1! Cheerios! 2! Frosted Flakes! 3! Cocoa Puffs! 4! I like it!
I'm a proud Western chauvinist.
And I refuse to apologize.
I refuse to apologize.
For creating the modern world.
For creating the modern world.
All right, boys, on 3. 1, 2, 3, go.
6.
1! Cheerios! 2! Frosted Flakes! 3! Wheaties! 4! Raisin Bran! 5!
We can also see what took place at January 6th. You can see that there was not a lot of planning, but they trusted in the leader. They believed in the valor of action for action's sake.
You know, I had supported Trump all that time. I did believe, that the election was being stolen. And Trump asked us to come.
He personally asked for us to come to D.C. that day. And I thought, for everything he's done for us, if this is the only thing he's going to ask of me, I'll do it.
Indeed, appeals to gut instinct are at the root of conservative thought. We can see back when George W. Bush was in power, he was talking about he made decisions from his gut. We can even see that there is a rejection of complexity. For example, we see James Lindsay ranting against holism.
What we need to discuss is this concept of holism or holistic thinking. It is the center of whether you want to call it the Marxist project or the dialectical leftist project, because it's actually at the center of their worldview. If you think of it as kind of a big religion.
This aspect of action for action's sake, trusting one's gut, is prevalent throughout the movement. Next, we have disagreement is treason. That is to say, there's a belief that there should be absolute unity under the party. It's often been said that Democrats fall in love and Republicans fall in line. That's why we see that anybody who dissents is a rhino, that is to say, a Republican in name only. Here we see again this rejection of complexity and nuance. Even more notably, there are some reports that indicate Trump supported the execution of Mike Pence for not following his orders to not verify the election.
After Trump's speech ended, chaos took over Capitol Hill as Trump supporters stormed the building in what the special counsel called one last effort to delay the vote certification. Back at the White House, the special counsel says Trump watched everything unfold in the Oval Office dining room, and while there by himself, sent a tweet which helped to fuel the riots. It was read in almost real time by a rioter with a bullhorn. Watch.
Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done to protect our country and our Constitution, giving states a chance to certify a corrected set of facts, not the fraudulent or inaccurate ones which they were asked to previously certify. U.S. demands the truth.
1 minute after that tweet was sent, Mike Pence, see him there, was evacuated to a secure location. When told that his vice president was in danger when he was sitting in the Oval Office dining room, Trump allegedly said back, quote, "So what?"
The next feature on the list is fear of difference, or I might put it as disgust at deviation. So it's pretty obvious that the MAGA movement is based in transphobia, even an almost genocidal kind of transphobia.
We are not going to let them harm our children. This case is just the beginning of the fight. It is not the end. We are not going to rest until every child is protected, until trans ideology is entirely erased from the earth. That's what we're fighting for, and we will not stop until we achieve it.
I love nothing more than to be dragged out at every fucking conceivable opportunity so you can fucking current day us. Sorry, did you want to get immersed in our world? Yeah, well, guess what? Fucking pronouns! Fucking gender ambiguity! Fucking current day Californian shit! Because that's all we fucking know! Because we're boring! We're so fucking boring!
Trump says that only male and female will be accepted genders, and that he will eliminate gender-affirming care.
On day one, I will revoke Joe Biden's cruel policies on so-called gender-affirming care. Ridiculous. A process that includes giving kids puberty blockers, mutating their physical appearance, and ultimately performing surgery on minor children. Can you believe this? I will sign a new executive order instructing every federal agency to cease all programs that promote the concept of sex and gender transition at any age. I will then ask Congress to permanently stop federal taxpayer dollars from being used to promote or pay for these procedures, and pass a law prohibiting child sexual mutilation in all 50 states. It'll go very quickly. I will declare that any hospital or healthcare provider that participates in the chemical or physical mutilation of minor youth will no longer meet federal health and safety standards for Medicaid and Medicare and will be terminated from the program immediately. My Department of Education will inform states and school districts that if any teacher or school official suggests to a child that they could be trapped in the wrong body, they will be faced with severe consequences, including potential civil rights violations for sex discrimination and the elimination of federal funding. As part of our new credentialing body for teachers, we will promote positive education about the nuclear family, the roles of mothers and fathers, and celebrating rather than erasing the things that make men and women different and unique. I will ask Congress to pass a bill establishing that the only genders recognized by the United States government are male and female, and they are assigned at birth.
The MAGA movement is also highly xenophobic. It is constantly fear-mongering about immigrants.
When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're not sending you. They're not sending you. They're sending people that have lots of problems, and they're bringing those problems with us. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people.
The movement is white supremacist and is based in a complete embrace of normalcy. You see that the 50s imagery they always like to present is completely whitewashed. There are no black people present. There's only white families behind little white picket fences. Their memes are constantly appealing to how much they hate the purple-haired SJWs, and all their insults are based around the ugliness and deviance of their opponents. There's even discussions of the concept of cultural Marxism, which is a direct corollary to the concept of cultural Bolshevism that was seen in Hitler's Germany. Next on the list is social frustration. That is to say, there are constant appeals to social frustration of some group of people being left behind. And we see this manifesting in that xenophobia and fear of immigrants, and those are weaponized and combined with things like the Great Replacement theory, this idea that all the white people are being replaced by immigrants and black people and Mexicans. This used to be an exclusively neo-Nazi conspiracy theory, but it has now become mainstream.
What appears to them is we're replacing national-born American, native-born Americans to permanently transform the political landscape.
Is it really they want to remake the demographics of America to ensure that they stay in power forever?
They can't win re-election in 2022 unless they bring in a large number of new voters to replace the voters that are already here. That's what this is about. We have an invasion in this country.
Democrats who want to replace you, the American voters, with newly amnestied citizens.
Congress is not going to act because one party has a vested interest in changing the population.
If you use the term as an invasion, that's not anti-Hispanic, it's a fact.
I have less political power because they're importing a brand new electorate. Why should I sit back and take that?
Or take, for example, Charlottesville, when you had a bunch of right-wing groups meet up and immediately it devolved into a fascist hate rally. You heard them chanting, "You will not replace us," sometimes even interspersed with "Jews will not replace us."
You will not replace us! You will not replace us! You will not replace us! Jews will not replace us! Jews will not replace us! Jews will not replace us! Blood and soil! 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 Blood and soil!
Numerous right-wing mass shooters have even cited replacement theory as part of their motivations in their manifestos.
Law enforcement says the man suspected of killing 10 people and injuring 3 others at a Buffalo supermarket had written a 180-page manifesto illustrating his fear that white Americans may one day be replaced by people of color, a nationalist conspiracy known as the Great Replacement theory.
So while that position used to be only the position of neo-Nazis, it has now become a majority position in the MAGA movement. And don't take my word for it. They did a poll in 2022 that showed that over 60% of Trump voters believed in the Great Replacement theory. The 7th feature on the list is ultranationalism and obsession with a plot. So ultranationalism is one that we already mentioned earlier in the previous framework, but it should be said that it is a very common feature of Trump's campaigns. He even calls himself a nationalist and said the word should be more normalized.
We're putting America first. It hasn't happened in a lot of decades. We're putting them first. We're taking care of ourselves for a change, folks. But radical Democrats want to turn back the clock toward the rule of corrupt, power-hungry globalists. You know what a globalist is, right? You know what a globalist is. A globalist is a person that wants the globe to do well, frankly, not caring about our country so much. And you know what? We can't have that. You know, they have a word. It sort of became old-fashioned. It's called a nationalist. And I say, really, we're not supposed to use that word. You know what I am? I'm a nationalist, okay? I'm a nationalist. Nationalist. Nothing else. Use that word. Use that word.
But you can't just have nationalism in fascism. Once again, remember, it's ultranationalism. So there has to be an out-group in order to define this in-group. Remember that the in-group is powerful and perfect and they're great. They've been ousted from their deserved place at the top of the hierarchy. So there has to be some kind of deep collusion behind the scenes to make sure that they don't get the power they deserve. So for that reason, there's always this obsession with a plot. And we can see that plot all over the MAGA movement. There's these constant mentions of the evils of globalism. MAGA is constantly talking about all these different conspiracy theory narratives. They've just become mainstreamed. Michael Knowles invited on a fake genius named Chris Langan, and all he did was peddle right-wing apologia and conspiracy theories when he was asked why things were happening.
Since we're already in it, there are going to be people out there who say, this guy is talking about every conspiracy theory I ever heard in the whole book. Since we're already in it, do you believe in aliens?
Well, I will say this, the intelligence community, large sectors of it believe in aliens.
Really?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. It's a big, they're constantly discussing these things. Yes. And if you look at the global elite, and you wonder, well, I don't want to blame the world banksters for this, that's a conspiracy theory. Then who is pulling all those strings? Okay? Could there be another kind of entity, aliens, demons, whatever? Could there be something that's pulling their strings that the global banksters know about, right? And they're taking orders from, but they're being totally concealed and hidden from the public. This is a viable hypothesis, and it's one that the intelligence communities don't reject.
It's funny you pose
which is, kind of neither here nor there, because the intelligence communities themselves could be run by aliens, for all we know.
Anti-Semitic conspiracy theories are prominent in the MAGA movement. For example, we have Kanye talking about the Jews.
Yet another controversy for Kanye West, also known as Ye. He's been locked out of his Twitter account now, the platform suspending him after an anti-Semitic tweet. That tweet said, quote, "When I wake up, I'm going DEFCON 3 on Jewish people."
That's right. You're not Hitler. You're not a Nazi. You don't deserve to be called that and demonized.
Well, I see good things about Hitler also. The Jew, I love everyone. I'm done with the classifications. Every human being has something of value that they brought to the table, especially Hitler.
We have Nick Fuentes becoming a more and more notable figure, being given more and more credibility by more and more normal right-wingers, especially those in the MAGA movement. Continuing this theme of there being obsession with a secret conspiracy, you have Alex Jones. He is the quintessential conspiracy theorist. He's constantly harping on about secret plots by a shadowy cabal.
Keep drinking the fluoride water, take all the vaccines, drink out of the bisphenol A plastic, just trust government, do whatever it says. The evil's growing, it's coming. What you asked for is now at the door, scratching. So open the door and prepare to meet your destiny, because you're cowards. Don't worry, everything you want will now be released upon you. All the soft kill, all the pain, the reactors blowing up, the fires, the earthquakes, the wars, the death, the pain, the humiliation. You want the abortions? You want the end of men? You want the end of families? All of it will now be yours. All of it. All of it's yours now. Hell is coming. Enjoy it!
There's also this hatred for the outsider, because if you have the inside group, once again, there must be hatred for that outside group. For example, he says Mexicans are not bringing their best. He calls them rapists. He says that they're genetically predisposed to this.
Now a murderer, I believe this, it's in their genes. And we got a lot of bad genes in our country right now.
When they I think the real number is 15, 16 million people into our country. When they do that, we got a lot of work to do. They're poisoning the blood of our country. That's what they've done. They poison mental institutions and prisons all over the world, not just in South America, not just the 3 or 4 countries that we think about, but all over the world. They're coming into our country from Africa, from Asia, all over the world. They're pouring into our country. Nobody's even looking at them. They just come in. The crime is going to be tremendous. The terrorism is going to be, and then we built a tremendous piece of the wall, and then we're going to build more.
Another notable figure is Jack Posobiec. At a conference for the Heritage Foundation, the organization that essentially wrote Trump's game plan for his coming administration, he said, "Let me lay out what actions the House should take next. Subpoena the cabinet members and their staff. bring them to the house immediately, demand their presence, and if they refuse, send the House Sergeant-at-Arms to lock them up right next to Steve Bannon and Peter Navarro. Here again, we see this mention of Steve Bannon, that is to say, there can be no toleration for disunity. In this speech by Posobiec, he's laying out the thesis of his book, and that book is titled Unhumans. Afterwards, it's said that he was congratulated for the speech by other members of the crowd at the Heritage Foundation. Next on the list, we have the enemy is both strong and weak. Because the fascist movement must simultaneously believe that it is strong and righteous and worthy, but also believe that it somehow has lost control over society, it has to cast its enemies as weak and strong simultaneously. Strong enough to have gained control, but weak enough to defeat. The left is Antifa super soldiers one day who are going to come burn down your little rural town, but they're also soy boys who can't even defend themselves. They're weak and can be easily defeated, but also they're a threat to Western civilization. The Jews control the world, but also they're being ousted, and the Democrats are part of a secret, shadowy, satanic cabal, but Trump is a shining crusader who will drain the swamp. The left wing is stupid, but also somehow they control all the educational institutions.
You aren't on the winning team, moron. You're idiot scum. You're weak. Someone who's strong wants to build up humanity. Someone who's strong wants to defend the weak, not chew their guts out. But you'd never know that because you're soulless and you're turned over to wickedness. And the only satisfaction I have is to know that you're going to be caught in your own trap. You're going to fall into your own pit. Cowardly trash.
The next feature we see is pacifism is trafficking with the enemy. Love of war. You can see Trump is continually telling his followers to fight for his presidency.
We will not let them silence your voices. We're not going to let it happen. Not going to let it happen. For years, Democrats have gotten away with election fraud and weak Republicans, and that's what they are. And we're going to have to fight much harder. And Mike Pence is going to have to come through for us. And if he doesn't, that will be a sad day for our country, because you're sworn to uphold our Constitution. Now it is up to Congress to confront this egregious assault on our democracy. And after this, we're going to walk down, and I'll be there with you. We're going to walk down, and we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women. And we're probably not going to be cheering so much for some of them.
He directly instigated January 6th with the help from QAnon, a MAGA conspiracy theory. Proud Boys are direct equivalents to the Brown Shirts, as are other neo-Nazi organizations that all, not coincidentally, support Donald Trump. You can see all of these stochastic terrorists who are exclusively right-wing, and they're all citing right-wing grievances.
Some of these manifestos indicate that a number of mass shooters are being inspired by one another. Social justice advocates say they're seeing a rise in deadly attacks motivated by white supremacist beliefs, which they're calling domestic terrorism. El Paso police now taking a close look at a manifesto released online shortly before Saturday's shooting, which they suspect belonged to the gunman. The document used anti-immigrant language and mirrored white supremacist beliefs, expressing support to the mass shooting in Christchurch, New Zealand.
Or look at Kyle Rittenhouse. He murdered people in cold blood and got away with it, and they turned him into a star. He's given standing ovations when he goes to conservative events. Or, for example, Trump says there were good people on both sides at Charlottesville.
It's on both sides, sir. You said there was hatred, there was violence on both sides.
Well, I do think there's blame. Yes, I think there's blame on both sides. You look at both sides, I think there's blame on both sides, and I have no doubt about it, and you don't have any doubt about it either. And if you reported it accurately, you would say.
Neo-Nazis started this. They showed up in Charlottesville to protest.
Excuse me, they didn't put themselves down as neo, and you had some very bad people in that group. But you also had people that were very fine people on both sides.
He tries to cast the left and the right as equally complicit, even though right-wingers literally murdered someone with a car and started street fights with random people on the street.
We begin with breaking news from Charlottesville, Virginia, where 2 people have been injured in an altercation with protesters who are out in force over the planned removal of a Confederate statue.
The breaking news from Charlottesville, Virginia tonight. There is a verdict in the trial of a man who drove his car into counter-protesters at that white nationalist rally, killing a young woman. ABC's Ariel Reshef with the verdict.
Tonight, that guilty verdict for the man who plowed his car into a crowd at a Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, killing 1 woman and injuring nearly 3 dozen others. James Fields convicted of first-degree murder in the death of 32-year-old Heather Heyer.
Number 10 on the list is elitism and hatred for the weak. Notice how the right wing is always talking about hatred of the moochers, people on food stamps, starving mothers, welfare queens.
Fiat Chrysler, General Motors, Sprint, Intel, and so many others are now, because of the election result, making major investments in the United States, expanding production, and hiring more workers. It's time for all Americans to get off of welfare and get back to work. You're going to love it. You're going to love it. You are going to love it. Somebody should run against John McCain, who has been, in my opinion, not so hot. And I supported him. He lost. He let us down. But, he lost. So I never liked him as much after that, because I don't like losers. But Frank, let me get to it. He hit me. He's not a war hero. He's a war hero. He's a war hero.
5.5 years.
He's a war hero because he was captured. I like people that weren't captured, okay? I hate to tell you.
Do you agree with that?
Written by a nice reporter. Now the poor guy, you got to see this guy. Oh, I don't know what I said. I don't remember. He's going like, I don't remember. Oh, maybe that's what I said. This was 14 years ago. They didn't do a retraction.
That reporter he is talking about is Serge Kovaleski, who now works for the New York Times. As you can see right there, he suffers from a chronic condition that impairs movement of his arms. A Times spokesman says they find it outrageous that Trump would ridicule the man's appearance.
Anybody who's employed doing a job should work like slaves for their employers. There's this absolute subversion of the self to all leaders. There's this mindless worship of Trump and hatred for the stupid masses that don't support him. Next in the list is that everyone is educated to become a hero. Here again, we see January 6th, we see QAnon. Trump even says directly,
we believe that our children should be taught to love their country, honor their history, and respect our great American flag. Above all, our children from every community must be taught that to be American is to inherit the spirit of the most adventurous and confident people ever to walk the face of the earth. Americans are the people who pursued our manifest destiny across the ocean, into the uncharted wilderness, over the tallest mountains, and then into the skies, and even into the stars.
Or how about back to that speech by Posobiec where he talks about his book, Unhumans? He demonstrated this concept exceptionally well. He said, with stakes such as these, we cannot falter. We cannot hesitate. We must act. This is a no-fail mission. We have no choice. We have no option but victory. And may the sword of St. Michael defend us. I don't know about you, but I will come home with my shield or on it. We are not the Christians who will be fed to the lions. We are the Christians who put on the full armor of God to march into battle against Satan and all his works. Here we again see this idea of action for action's sake. And suffice to say, if you go read that whole speech, it is filled with fascist signifiers. Number 12 on the list, we have Machismo, sexual displacement, and love of weapons. Notice that there is this constant hatred for women in the right wing, and there's this extreme overlap between MAGA and these Andrew Tate types. Trump's first big scandal was that grab him by the pussy line, which everyone shrugged off as inconsequential on the right wing.
I moved on her, and I failed. I'll admit it.
Whoa.
I did try and fuck her. She was married.
It's huge news, Sarah.
No, Nancy. Yeah. No, this was marriages. And I moved on her very heavily. In fact, I took her out furniture shopping. She wanted to get some furniture. I said, I'll show you where they have some nice furniture. I took her out furniture. I moved on her like a bitch, but I couldn't get there. And she was married. And all of a sudden, I see her. She's now got the big phony tits and everything. She's totally changed her look. I better use some Tic Tacs just in case I start kissing her. You know, I'm automatically attracted to beautiful. I just start kissing them. It's like a magnet. You just kiss. I don't even wait. And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything.
Whatever you want.
Grab them by the pussy.
Trump was also a close friend of Jeffrey Epstein and a frequent visitor to his parties. If you want to learn more about the extensive connections between Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein, Chill Goblin created an excellent video on this topic. Also, we can see that the right wing is constantly fetishizing weapons and the ability to inflict violence. The examples are so numerous that I don't even assume I really need to cite examples. In Panama, a highway was blocked by climate protesters, and an elderly lawyer murdered them in cold blood. Pictures of him shooting them circulated on social media, and conservatives cheered it on. They still post pictures of the murderer as if he's a hero. When that murderer walked up to the people who were doing this action, he asked who the leaders were, and he was told that there were no leaders. He responded, "I don't want to talk to women, I want to talk to men," before he shot them. Or take, for example, that many martial arts gyms are full of fascists. Some gyms are even organized with explicitly fascist ends and have coded fascist symbolism. So if you see a gym that uses wolf or werewolf symbolism, you should be really careful because that is a very common fascist dog whistle. And these are not only places where the fascists learn to do violence, but they're also places for them to recruit more fascists. Trump also regularly calls for violence against his enemies, including protesters and political opponents.
Get his product into China. No matter what he does, he can't. They send their product. Oh, bye-bye. Good job, fella. Bye-bye. Look, see, he's smiling. See, he's having a good time. I love the old days, you know? You know what I hate? There's a guy totally disruptive, throwing punches. We're not allowed to punch back anymore. I love the old days. You know what they used to do to guys like that when they were in a place like this? They'd be carried out on a stretcher, folks. That's true. You know, I love our police, and I really respect our police, and they're not getting enough. They're not. But honestly, I hate to see that. Here's a guy throwing punches, nasty as hell, screaming at everything else when we're talking. And he's walking out, and we're not allowed, you know, the guards are very gentle with him. He's walking out like big high fives, smiling, laughing, like to punch him. I'll tell you.
And when you see these towns, and when you see these thugs being thrown into the back of a paddy wagon, you just see them thrown in, rough. I said, please don't be too nice. Like when you guys put somebody in the car and you're protecting their head, you know, the way you put their hand over. Like, don't hit their head, and they've just killed somebody, don't hit their head. I said, you can take the hand away, okay?
Here's a list of 40 times that he has advocated for violence against citizens of the United States.
Maybe he should have been roughed up because it was absolutely disgusting what he was doing.
Knock the crap out of him, would you? Seriously. Okay? Just knock the hell. I promise you, I will pay for the legal fees. I promise.
I would bring back waterboarding, and I'd bring back a hell of a lot worse than waterboarding.
I'd like to punch him in the face.
Anyway, but next on the list is selective populism, and I'm just going to quote Umberto Eco at length on this one. To have a good instance of qualitative populism, we no longer need the Piazza Venezia in Rome or the Nuremberg Stadium. There is in our future a TV or internet populism in which the emotional response of a select group of citizens can be presented and accepted as the voice of the people. Because of its qualitative populism, fascism must be against rotten parliamentary governments. One of the first sentences uttered by Mussolini in the Italian parliament was, "I could have transformed this deaf and gloomy place into a biovac for my maniples." Maniples being a subdivision of the traditional Roman legion. As a matter of fact, he immediately found better housing for his maniples, but a little later he liquidated the parliament. Whenever a politician casts doubt on the legitimacy of a parliament because it no longer represents the voice of the people, we can smell fascism. So what is meant here by qualitative or selective populism? Well, what it means is that it's not actually populist. That is to say, it's not actually supporting what the masses believe. It is supporting what a particular subdivision of the masses believe. This select group of people that are meant to represent the masses are then given utter primacy within fascist politics. And this selective population is then sort of collectivized. They are made to give up their individuality and instead act together for these fascist principles. So we can see, for example, QAnon popularizing this abbreviation, this string of letters and numbers, WWG1WGA. You know, a lot of you might have seen that sort of string of letters and numbers at the end of some MAGA post and not knowing what the hell it means. But what it means is where we go one, we go all. And the question is, all of who? The answer is the selective populace.
Media will not show the magnitude of this crowd. Even I turned on today, I looked and I saw thousands of people here, but you don't see hundreds of thousands of people behind you because they don't want to show that. We have hundreds of thousands of people here, and I just want them to be recognized by the fake news media. Turn your cameras, please, and show what's really happening out here, because these people are not going to take it any longer. They're not going to take it any longer. Go ahead, turn your cameras, please, would you show? They came from all over the world, actually, but they came from all over our country. I'm honest, and I just, again, I want to thank you. It's just a great honor to have this kind of crowd and to be before you and hundreds of thousands of American patriots who are committed to the honesty of our elections and the integrity of our glorious republic. All of us here today do not want to see our election victory stolen by emboldened radical left Democrats, which is what they're doing, and stolen by the fake news media. That's what they've done and what they're doing. We will never give up. We will never concede. It doesn't happen. You don't concede when there's theft involved.
In QAnon, the movement was only meant to act in the interests of Trump, to follow his orders before the storm. There was constant doubt and conspiracies around the system of elections and government. Here again, we see the Great Replacement theory, which is meant to establish the idea that the Democrats are an illegitimate ruling party because their constituency are illegal immigrants, and the only quote-unquote true people are the Republicans, representing the core principles of America. So Look at how Trump is constantly talking about how he wants to drain the swamp. I'm going to give you numerous examples of him saying this.
We have begun to drain the swamp of government corruption by imposing a 5-year ban on lobbying by executive branch officials.
I want the entire corrupt Washington establishment to hear and to hear and to heed the words I am about to say. And we are going to drain the swamp.
For too long, a small group in our nation's capital has reaped the rewards of government while the people have borne the cost. Washington flourished, but the people did not share in its wealth. Politicians prospered, but the jobs left and the factories closed. That all changes starting right here and right now.
But since taking office, Trump has struggled as members of his own administration have been caught in the types of controversies he campaigned against. A number of prominent members of Trump's inner circle have resigned amid accusations of corruption, and some are now facing criminal charges.
14th on the list is Newspeak. So Newspeak is a reference to George Orwell's 1984, where the government of this book has created an alternative English where they've taken out almost all adjectives and adverbs, and everything is extremely boiled down so that nobody can talk about anything complex. So once again, we're back to reduction of complexity. And the MAGA movement is absolutely inundated with empty words, which are just meant to shut down complex thought and reduce complexity. It used to be political correctness, but then it became critical race theory, wokeness, DEI, cancel culture. And you can tell these are thought-terminating cliches because conservatives can't even define what they mean by any of these words when they're pressed.
What does the word woke mean to you?
What is the word? Oh, this is one of these questions that people try to ask. And look, I think it's one of these things. It's like art. You know it when you see it.
Or porn was the famous definition of that.
Oh, that's right. Porn. You know it when you see it. I know it's art or porn or something. I mean, I guess you could say the two are the same, but yeah, you know it when you see it.
Well, I guess woke is a term that's been popularized in recent times, and it is mostly used by the right to describe people on the left who are trying to draw some important but sometimes exaggerated questions about different aspects of society that they want changed.
Like, this lady wrote an entire book on the topic of wokeness and just clams up when she's asked to define wokeness.
Americans consider themselves very liberal, and probably fewer of them consider themselves to be woke. And so, when we talk about traditional,
what does that mean to you? Would you mind defining woke? Because it's come up a couple times, and I just want to make sure we're on the same page.
So, I mean, woke is sort of the idea that this is going to be one of those moments that goes viral. I mean, woke is something that's very hard to define, and we've spent an entire chapter defining it. It is sort of the understanding that we need to totally reimagine and redo society in order to create hierarchies of oppression. It's hard to explain in a 15-second soundbite.
Or look at how they call good people SJWs, which means social justice warrior. Apparently it's bad to be a social justice warrior. And if people do good things, they are virtue signaling. Being a good person is cultural Marxism, and it's involved with Jewish globalists. All of these are buzzwords that are masquerading as criticisms. They're empty. They are thought-terminating cliches. Their purpose is to make people stop thinking and to get angry. So there we have it. All 14 of Umberto Eco's features demonstrated at length. But there is no reason to stop there. It's really not even that veiled that Trump is a fascist. Trump, in private talks with his generals, praised Hitler's generals and said that what he wished he had was more faithful generals.
Trump has frequently voiced his disdain for those who serve in the military and for their devotion to duty, honor, and sacrifice. Former generals who have worked for Trump say that the sole military virtue he prizes is obedience. As his presidency drew to a close, and in the years since, he has become more and more interested in the advantages of dictatorship and the absolute control over the military that he believes it would deliver. "I need the kind of generals that Hitler had," Trump said in a private conversation in the White House, according to two people who heard him say this. People who were totally loyal to him, that follow orders. A desire to force U.S. military leaders to be obedient to him and not the Constitution is one of the constant themes of Trump's military-related discourse.
Trump, in divorce proceedings with his previous wife, was said to keep Hitler's speeches on his bedside table. And we have even more direct things than that. Trump's previous chief of staff says that Trump is a fascist.
As we just heard, retired four-star General John Kelly, who was one of Donald Trump's White House chiefs of staff, told the New York Times Donald Trump would rule like a fascist if reelected. Kelly also spoke to The Atlantic's editor-in-chief Jeffrey Goldberg for a new piece which quotes Donald Trump as once having said, "I need the kind of generals that Hitler had."
Trump's previous serving general called him a fascist directly.
Bob Woodward's new book, War, page 179, where Mark Milley corners Bob Woodward at a large reception in Washington in a room crowded with people and has a very private one-on-one conversation with him, telling Bob Woodward this about Donald Trump, the president Mark Milley worked for. "He is the most dangerous person ever. I had suspicions when I talked to you about his mental decline and so forth, but now I realize he's a total fascist. He is the most dangerous person to this country, a fascist to the core." Milley repeated to me, "I will never forget the intensity of his worry."
Or, for example, Trump tried to coup the government on January 6th when he lost the election. Then he echoed calls to execute Mike Pence for disobeying him and certifying the election. I know I already mentioned this, but this is really strongly similar to a historic event that took place right before Hitler rose to power in Germany called the Beer Hall Putsch. This was an event where Hitler tried to coup the German government and he failed and was then imprisoned. And while he was in prison, he wrote Mein Kampf. However, unlike Hitler, Trump wasn't even prosecuted for his beer hall putsch. Lastly, the third theorist of fascism that we mentioned, Robert Paxton, at one point he wasn't sure if Trump was a fascist, but after January 6th, he actually came out and said that yes, Trump is a fascist. So now let's talk about Robert Paxton. Paxton says that fascism shouldn't be defined as an ideology. He says, feelings propel fascism more than thought does. Instead, he says, we should think of it as taking place in phases and processes. And you can see this summarized on Wikipedia, and that's the summary I'm going to be using here. Robert Paxton says phase number 1 is intellectual exploration, where disillusionment with popular democracy manifests itself in discussions of lost national vigor. For us in the US, the bottom-up aspect of this would have been in movements such as the KKK. However, I would argue politically that the truest origination is in what is called the John Birch Society. I'm not going to go on at length about what the John Birch Society is, just understand that it is a conservative and anti-communist organization that has been in operation for many decades now. I recommend that you just go Google it and read about it. But also, this stage 1 is kind of just embodied in conservative thought more generally. Roger Scruton, who is a conservative intellectual, in heavy quotation marks, says, the job of the conservative intellectual is to articulate things that the common man knows intuitively. that is the embryo of fascism, the appeal to emotion and gut instinct over rationality. Because we live in a hierarchical society, appealing to the gut instincts of the people is to appeal to their ingrained hierarchical thinking, not any particular rational impulse. People driven by their gut are manipulable by demagogues. So phase 2 is what he calls rooting, where a fascist movement, aided by political deadlock and polarization, becomes a player on the national stage. In the US, this was the role of the Tea Party, but it had its start with the interventions of the Koch brothers and their various propaganda campaigns. They were terrified by Occupy Wall Street and Barack Obama, and so the conservatives agreed to form coalitions with these insurgent proto-fascists, which were masquerading as American libertarians. This began an extended era of obstructionism by the conservatives, which helped escalate that deadlock and polarization. Then you've got phase 3, which he calls arrival to power, where conservatives seeking to control rising leftist opposition invite fascists to share power. This is where MAGA enters. The leftist opposition in question was Bernie Sanders and the aftermath of the Occupy movement, then the rise of the DSA. Then, during the rise of Trump and MAGA, trans issues were coming to the fore. 2 waves of Black Lives Matter protests, and Me Too had transformed discussions around sexual assault. Moreover, climate protests have escalated around the world. So, by this point, the long game of the Tea Party from phase 2 had already succeeded, and now a new insurgent wave of fascism came along with Trump. We are, as of this video, in this stage. However, we are about to be entering stage 4, exercise of power, where the movement and its charismatic leader control the state in balance with state institutions, such as the police, and traditional elites, such as the clergy and business magnates. We cannot know what will happen in this stage, but suffice to say, history gives us a pretty grisly forecast. Lastly, only fascist Italy and Nazi Germany have ever reached stage 5. Stage 5 is radicalization or entropy, where the state either becomes increasingly radical, as did Nazi Germany, or slips into traditional authoritarian rule, as did fascist Italy. So, I think you'll agree, once you've heard me lay this all out in various frameworks, that it is pretty well indisputable that Trump is a fascist and the MAGA movement is a fascist movement. Things are probably about to get very dark, and people need to prepare themselves for radicalism and militancy. Because those who are most vulnerable are going to need us more than ever. That is going to require us to rise above petty squabbles, while at the same time not allowing opportunists and power hoarders to come into our midst and convince us to abandon our principles to defeat fascism. We are going to have to build a real counterpower to the state and to capital and to white supremacy and to transphobia and to homophobia and all these other hierarchies of power. They are about to be highly empowered by the rise of this fascist movement. So, while I was researching for this video, I read quite a bit about different fascist projects, and it occurs to me that fascism is often allowed to rise because the average person simply doesn't want to accept that fascism is rising, that things are still normal and okay. And by the time things are no longer normal and okay, it's too late. There's a famous poem, and I assume that a lot of people in my audience have heard it, but I'm going to quote it anyway for people that may not have heard it before. And a lot of people may have even heard a variation of it, but I'm going to read the full version for you. First, they came for the communists, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. Then they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. So, let me ask you, are you going to wait for them to come for you before you speak out? Before you do something? Before you resort to radical action? And be remembered by the history books as someone who let this happen?
Jews will not replace us! Jews will not replace us! Blood and soil! Blood and soil! Blood and soil! Blood and soil! Blood and soil!
So anyway, that's the video. Hope it was educational. I don't think it probably brightened up anybody's day. If you appreciate the work that I'm doing on this channel, you should click like. If you have thoughts about the ideas I've presented here, you should go down below and leave me a comment. If you are interested in this video, and this is the first video you've been served up, or if you've been served up numerous videos and you like what I'm doing here, you should subscribe to the channel because I do this kind of analysis pretty often. Lastly, if you really appreciate the work that I'm doing on this channel, you should go over to my Patreon and become a patron for any amount. Also, if you'd like, my work is hosted on Means TV. If you use my discount code, which is Anark, A-N-A-R-K, you will get a discount and I will receive a small cut of that. But I won't go on. I think that's all I'm going to do for the spiel today. I appreciate y'all watching the video, and I'll see y'all next time.